I've been a resident of Elk Grove, Stonelake, since 2007. My husband and I worked in law enforcement when we first purchased our home. He was a police officer and I was a public safety dispatcher. Due to our professions and the dangers that came with our jobs, we searched to live in a community where we both felt safe to raise our family. That was the reason we fell with Stonelake community. It provided us with peace of mind, knowing that our family would always be safe. However, I do not feel that safety anymore, not with the level 2 trauma hospital in our neighborhood. The safety of my family and my neighbors will be compromised, and that is something that I'm not okay with. From my work experience as a dispatcher, I was directed many times to make calls around hospitals looking for suspects with injuries that might have checked themselves into our hospitals in the surrounding Sacramento area. Suspects, as we know it, are people that commit crimes and will take any measure possible to escape justice. Is this the type of activity that you want happening in our backyards? Have you considered the safety of the families and children in Stonelake? My home is a place that my family and I consider a safe zone, but we will no longer feel that safety, and we feel that this type of activity happening so close to our home is a dangerous and a scary place to live. The very same chaos that many people like myself strive to avoid will be right in my backyard. Does the Elk Grove Police have the manpower to respond to the demanding calls that will be taking place in and or around the hospital? As a spouse of a police officer and from my professional knowledge as a dispatcher, I can attest to the fact that calls for service in and around hospitals increase. I found a number of disturbing calls of service myself in researching trauma hospitals. Some of the permanent calls surrounding trauma hospitals include possessions of narcotics, assault battery, traffic collision, warrant arrest, vandalism, burglary, stolen vehicles, and etc. I'd like to know, how is the impact of increased service calls in staffing strength been assessed by our city and our police? Lastly, I'd like to urge you to listen to the concerns of our community. The information we are providing you really is a gift. Do the right thing before it's too late. Thank you, and that's all.
Both you, Mr. Lee and Mr. Soon, have publicly shown your biased support of this project by having them come to your place and you using their place and accepting contributions to your campaigns. I believe that in good faith, you both, at least you two, and if anybody else has accepted contributions from him, should recuse himself from any voting that has to do with this hospital. It is unethical that you would vote for anything that has to do with this hospital, since you have actually accepted money from this man. Thank you.
Mr. Hobbs, and I've asked you this before, if you can chime in and clarify what the law says about campaign contribution and how that impacts electeds.
The fact that you've received a campaign contribution does not necessarily disqualify you from participating in a decision from the source of the campaign contribution.
In what kind of instance would create a conflict of interest?
For instance, if you have a direct financial interest in the business, if you have an ownership interest in the business, if you're receiving other income besides campaign contributions, excessive gifts, things like that could create a conflict of interest that could disqualify a council member from voting on a project, so generally speaking.
Let's say if I was part owner of the university, would that create a conflict of interest?
Well, it depends. It could. It could create a conflict of interest. The rules are somewhat tricky when it comes to that. How much ownership you have? Is it a stock ownership? Are you on the board of directors? How much say you have in it? We would have to look at the detailed facts of those. They're very fact-specific inquiries. But to answer your question generally, if you did have an ownership interest, that could very well disqualify you from voting on the project.
But the mere fact that there are members of the board that made a contribution to a campaign, does that create a conflict of interest?
Not necessarily create a conflict of interest. It could if you add certain facts to it. Again, I'm speaking very generally.